Welcome back to this Real America's Voice Newsbreak. I'm Terrence Bates. The feds are reportedly preparing for what's being described as a targeted immigration enforcement operation in Minnesota. The targets would primarily be Somali immigrants who are living here in the United States illegally. The Associated Press reports the effort could start in the coming days and would center on the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, which has a sizable Somali population. In fact, that area is home to the nation's largest Somali population. Agents will be looking for people with final orders of deportation. President Trump speaking out on this issue earlier this week.
I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country.
Minneapolis's mayor says that his city's police officers will not work with federal agents during the immigration enforcement. Quote, targeting Somali people means that the due process will be violated, mistakes will be made, and, let's be clear, it means that American citizens will be detained for no other reason than the fact that they look like they are Somali. This is not now and will never be a legitimate reason, he says. President Trump continuing his push to reverse any actions from his predecessor, Joe Biden, that were enacted with the use of the now infamous auto pen. Taking to True Social 47 writing, any and all documents, proclamations, executive orders, memorandums, or contracts signed by order of the now infamous and unauthorized auto pen within the administration of Joseph R. Biden Jr. are hereby null, void, and of no further force or effect. Anyone receiving pardons, commutations, or any other legal document so signed, please be advised that said document has been fully and completely terminated and is of no legal effect. Thank you for your attention to this matter, he goes on to write. President Trump and others, of course, continue to question whether Biden was mentally fit during his time in the White House. They also believe the former president's aides and others around him made key decisions and used the auto pen to enforce them unbeknownst to Biden. That's a quick check of your headlines.
Democracy lives in light. The Charlie Kirk Show.
Welcome back to the Charlie Kirk Show. We're going to talk about TikTok. Connection and open dialogue, those are the things that build communities. Charlie Kirk and TikTok shared in that knowledge. That is why TikTok has built a space where that kind of listening actually happens. People don't just post, they respond. They build on each other's ideas. You can see a teacher simplifying a tough lesson so that it finally clicks, or you can see a gardener sharing a trick that saved their crop. But what matters most isn't the video, it's what comes next. Someone asking a question, someone else answering that question with a story of their own. And suddenly people you've never met are becoming a new community built on curiosity. When people listen and when people understand, a shift happens. Walls come down, ideas travel farther, and connection, real connection, takes the place of isolation. That is what listening does. It reminds us that we're not as different as we might think we are. And that is what makes TikTok so powerful. It's a place where every post turns into a conversation and every conversation can make a difference. And to have a very interesting conversation right now, we're joined by Bill Gillen. Are you there, Bill?
I am. Can you hear me?
Welcome, Bill. So I want to introduce you a bit. So we've talked a ton recently about all these stories coming out of Minnesota. It's got to be the top political content producer state per capita in the union recently. We've got stories about widespread fraud in the Somali community. We have some outrageous criminal justice decisions that we'll outline here. It's the state that gave us Ilhan Omar. We love to talk about her. And I wanted to shout you guys out because, Bill, you are one of the 3 authors at Powerline blog. That is a blog so old, I was reading it when I was in high school, and I'm an old fuddy-duddy here. And Powerline blog is one of the great American blogs. They're guys in Minnesota. They're doing what any one of you out there could do, because I think a lot of your 2 fellow bloggers, I think, work as lawyers. They're not just writers by trade. And you guys have a lot of accomplishments. You were some of the first guys to be talking about these fraud stories that are happening. And Most memorably, I've got to shout you out. You were the original ones who wrote about Ilhan Omar marrying her brother, correct?
Correct. She did marry her brother.
She
She
did?
denied it as recently as, I think, an hour ago.
An hour ago? Really? As recently as that?
Yeah,
You are on top of that.
Saying she didn't marry her brother, but she did.
She did. This should be investigated. I'd really love to see. I want the full story on that. Somehow it's just treated like a total black box. We'll never know the truth somehow. Absolute lunacy. But the more recent thing that's been going on, of course, is the Somali fraud story. It went viral because of a report from Chris Rufo and Ryan Thorpe at City Journal. But you guys have justifiably pointed out it has been known in the state of Minnesota for a while, and it's more that the nation is it's coming to their attention, and it's really wider than even just the list of stories in that. I think we have a chart here that I want to bring up. It's made by you. It's just the scale of different fraud schemes that have been unfolding in Minnesota. Can you lay that out for us?
Yeah, so I created something I called the scandal tracker for exactly the reasons that you were pointing out before. And the phrase that I use is Minnesota, this is a Churchillian phrase, Minnesota produces more news than can be consumed locally. So we've had a couple of these huge industrial scale welfare frauds that have gone on in the state. And I think it was a reader of mine asks, well, what other scandal? How deep does this go? And so I started putting together this tracker where I have tracked 28 separate scandals involving money, taxpayer money, state or federal taxpayer money that have been stolen through fraud. And I need to update it because there was a news story that came out in the last day or so, yet another fraud unrelated to the Somali frauds that we've been talking about. And some of those numbers are kind of low as federal investigators or state investigators dig deeper, the dollar amount keeps growing. As I say,
we have the chart up next to you right now, actually. And yeah, it's 300 million feeding our future. We have 100 million for the child care assistance program. But I know now we're estimating that because the total here is 660 million, but I know they're throwing around the B word, $1 billion for a lot of this now.
Right. So this is a dated chart. I need to update it. But our local prosecutor, the head prosecutor for white collar crime at the federal U.S. Attorney's Office, he is on record as saying his office is prosecuting over $1 billion with a B dollars worth of fraud. And he's only got half a dozen prosecutors in his office. He has openly admitted, I can't prosecute all the cases that come to me. So when he puts a dollar amount together, he thinks the total is over $2 billion. I mean, again, plural, more than $2 billion worth of fraud. And you've seen other numbers thrown around, $6 billion, $8 billion. But Joe Thompson, he's got access to all the bank records and all the FBI reports. And he's personally prosecuting $1 billion worth now. And he thinks he could productively prosecute another full $1 billion.
So you're a Minnesota resident. You focus on Minnesota. It does seem to produce more content than it consumes locally as far as news goes. What do you think is the secret sauce of Minnesota, where it's like you have this kind of perfect combination of old-fashioned, maybe call it naive liberalism, call it Tim Waltzism, and then also this new immigration-driven dimension of left-wing problems in American life?
That's the lethal combination. Minnesota was founded by a diverse group of immigrants, a lot of them from Scandinavia, but also German, Irish, other groups. But you had in Minnesota until maybe 30, 40 years ago, a fairly homogeneous population of Northern Europeans. And again, it's not, I don't think it's racist to point out that in Scandinavia, you can run a Scandinavian-style socialist welfare state in a fairly homogeneous nation and be successful with it. And Minnesota tried that and succeeded at some level with that approach, the Scandinavian style. You can do that in a high-trust society. But as we've brought in people who don't come from that background, who don't come from high-functioning or high-trust societies, who don't have the experience with the cradle-to-grave welfare societies, some individuals in those communities, certainly not most, certainly not all, but some individuals, we're talking a few hundred to maybe a couple of thousand people, have found the loopholes in the safety net and have exploited it to make themselves extremely wealthy. And more than a few have gone to prison, and dozens have been convicted. And I think it's that lethal combination of the Scandinavian-style cradle-to-grave welfare state designed for a homogeneous, high-trust society being exploited by a society that has evolved, and perhaps for the better, into a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. But those just two fundamental approaches to running a society don't match.
So this has gotten a ton of attention from the Trump administration. They've talked about sending all these IRS agents to review everything, although it seems like the local prosecutor has a lot of this well in hand, though we'd be grateful to find more.
He has a lot of it well in hand, but I'm sure he would appreciate the additional assistance. Again,
I believe it. Do you have anything you think so? What would you recommend if, now that it's getting more federal attention, where do you think focus could be most rewarding in terms of making additional fines that could be good for the country to expose?
Yeah, so it's a target-rich environment, and it's gotten to the point where somebody responded to me on Twitter that maybe it's just time to put the state into receivership. That the federal prosecutor, instead of prosecuting criminals one at a time, the fraud is being conducted at an industrial scale, but the prosecutions by necessity under our Constitution happen at a retail scale, one defendant at a time, who has the full suite of civil rights and rights in court, and they exercise them, which is their right. But to prosecute a trial, the first batch of Feeding Our Future, the original scandal, those indictments, the first batch came in September of 2022. We didn't have our first trial until 2024, and we have trials scheduled into 2026. And that's just for the defendants that have been indicted to date. And again, it seems like one or two a week, additional indictments come down. But it's got to be a holistic approach. You know, the fraudsters figured out how to defraud one program in one state agency and applied that same technique to another program in a different state agency. The agencies weren't talking to each other. I really think we need to have a top-down review of the social welfare programs, maybe consolidate fewer programs, put more investigators on it, put more restrictions on it. A little bit of due diligence would have gone a long way in these frauds. If somebody just visited site locations or done some basic background checks, hundreds of millions of dollars could have been prevented from going out the door, but they didn't. It's a system. Minnesota has the system which I characterize as the honor system. So all of state government's on the honor system. If you apply for a benefit or you send the state an invoice, their first instinct is just trust that you're doing it, under penalty of perjury. You sign the document.
It's unbelievable to me. Yeah, the honor system, it doesn't work. It's clearly getting looted, and you really have to make the case. They're just plundering the entire rest of the state. We still have we have a fellow producer here, Danny, who's with us. Danny, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, Bill, thanks for coming on. I wonder, do you think other states are just as bad? Like, I assume Michigan's probably pretty bad with all this welfare fraud and stuff. Do you think that Minnesota's the outlier, or do you think all of them? The short answer is it's everywhere. In the early days of my reporting on that Feeding Our Future scandal, I was contacted by people in other states as far away as Alabama, where they had almost identical scams being perpetrated, but at just a much smaller scale. It's interesting that we had the past U.S. attorney, the outgoing U.S. attorney who was a Biden appointee. He went on local TV and he said Minnesota has a fraud problem, that fraud is occurring everywhere in America. This was referring to the COVID era frauds, but the scale in Minnesota is unique. So yes, I think the fraud is happening everywhere, but I don't know if any state on a per capita basis has seen the level of fraud that Minnesota has.
It really, the thing that stood out to me so much in the New York Times article, which was remarkably frank and honest finally about what's going on, it was two things. It was the way it was caught immediately, or caught pretty quickly, and they just did nothing because they directly feared being called
literally
racist.
Caught on day zero. The original fraudsters in that food program, where their applications were denied by the State Department of Education. They applied, Department of Education said no, because they realized from just review of their applications
that they weren't bona fide operators, but there were lawsuits and accusations of racism, and they never had the courage of their convictions, and they just let it slip through, figuring it was somebody else's problem.
Yeah, and the other thing, which is they were warned about this, and then they said they're an important political bloc, and they don't want to offend them that. We'll be right back. We have to go to another break, but we'll hit this, and we'll also hit the very interesting judicial decisions that are being given to us by the state of Minnesota. Up next.